The clock is ticking. This weekend, on Saturday, at the stroke of midnight, the U.S. government will grind to a halt. An attempt on Friday to get a stopgap funding bill passed, it didn't make it. Now, this is about more than lawmakers missing a deadline. This is about political dysfunction. Republicans willing to compromise against Republicans, right-wing Republicans, refusing to bend on anything. And this is also about numbers. A Republican-supported bill in the House of Representatives would most likely not survive in a Senate dominated by Democrats. Now, Republicans want more funding to protect and patrol the U.S. border with Mexico. They accuse President Biden and the Democrats of ignoring wave after wave of migrants entering the country. At the same time, Republicans are pointing to the $100 billion given to Ukraine since the Russian invasion, accusing the White House of giving Ukraine a blank check to write and spend as it pleases. Well, tonight it looks like no one will be writing any checks anytime soon.
Divisions between House Republicans and Democrats on spending cuts, aid to Ukraine, and border protection are hindering efforts to get even a temporary funding solution off the ground. And the country's most prominent Republican is urging his colleagues to let the shutdown happen. Until Congress approves new funding, the federal government won't be able to continue fulfilling various functions. But remember that the U.S. government is the nation's largest employer. There are over 2 million federal workers. Thousands could be furloughed or have to work without pay until the shutdown ends, disrupting various sectors from health to law enforcement to national park management. But the effects could even be felt beyond the U.S. It's a little over a week since President Vladimir Zelensky came to Washington to rally more support for his country. In the immediate term, aid to Ukraine remains protected, even in a shutdown. But that spending on Ukraine has become a sticking point in these negotiations means Zelensky may need to worry about future support.
It's a big concern because you already see that Republican congressmen are disputing how much money the US government is spending supporting Ukraine's efforts in defending itself against the Russian invasion. There are already questions being asked, and they're being made part of the debate on the government shutdown and whether the Republicans allow the Democrats to pass their budget. So it's not just a direct hit from the government shutdown to Ukraine spending, but the question of Ukraine spending is influencing whether or not we have a government shutdown and how long it lasts.
But the good news is the U.S. is no stranger to shutdowns, and sooner or later, they're resolved.
The forces that want to force a shutdown tend to be very adamant at the very beginning, but then as time goes on and the nation gets annoyed about what's going on, they find that it's harder to maintain their fervor, and then they'll eventually look for a compromise. I would tell our allies and partners, this is not something new. Our political processes are not working very well, but what needs to be judged is what comes out the other end.
But what exactly comes out on the other end and how long it's going to take to get there remain the crucial open questions in a shutdown. And it won't just be the American people, but Ukraine and U.S. allies across the Atlantic that will be waiting for answers.
All right, let's cross over now to Washington. My colleague and our correspondent, Janelle Malloy, and she has been on this story for us today. Janelle, it's the 11th hour already. Is there any way that we're going to see any rescue of the budget before midnight Saturday night?
Well, there's little sign of that. They're nowhere near a deal. We saw Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy mount what was arguably his best shot at getting a stop-gap bill through. This is a bill that would have seen the government funded at least until the end of next month. But it was voted down by all House Democrats and 21 Republicans, saying that this was also a bill that had deep spending cuts in it and immigration restrictions. So even if it had cleared the House, it would have been dead on arrival in a Democratic-controlled Senate. Now, the Senate, for its part, is trying to get its own stopgap bill through that would keep the government spending at current levels until mid-November at least. It would have provided a roughly $6 billion in aid for Ukraine and a similar amount in disaster relief. But House Republicans have already said that they would reject it. They want to see deeper spending cuts Democrats and less aid to Ukraine. So we have the situation where each chamber is rejecting the proposed solutions of the other chamber, depending on which majority controls it. And that is making the prospect of a shutdown ever likelier.
And on Capitol Hill, when you are the Speaker of the House or the Leader of the Senate, you're in charge of legislation, moving it through the chamber. It's your decision whether or not a vote takes place on it. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, he put today's stopgap bill up for a vote, reportedly knowing that it would not pass. How damaged is he tonight?
Well, he wanted to be seen as doing something to avert the shutdown, but obviously the defeat of his stopgap bill was a terrible setback. Some are even calling it a no-confidence vote in McCarthy. But let's not forget that his position has always been difficult. It took 15 rounds of voting to get him the speakership. The Republicans have a tiny majority in the House, so there's a contingent of far-right Republicans that make his job particularly difficult. They've threatened to oust him from the speakership if he cuts a deal with the Democrats to get funding through. Now, all of this there's already starting to be talk about who could replace McCarthy in the event of an ouster. But for better or worse, replacing him is not going to be easy. The thing that McCarthy really has going for him is that he really, really wants this job. Pointing again to those 15 rounds of voting, he just kept coming back. And anybody who would be in a position to replace him might not want the job as much, perhaps because of all the challenges that I have already mentioned. Clearly, Brent, as we're seeing tonight, it's somewhat of a thankless job.
Yeah, a job that will let the country grind to a halt, if need be. Janelle DeMalion in Washington. Thank you, Janelle. Have a good weekend, if you can. Well, I'm joined now by Yevgenia Kravchuk, a member of the Ukrainian parliament and a spokesperson for President Volodymyr Zelensky's Servant of the People Party. Ms. Kravchuk, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight. You, I'm sure, saw it today.
Thank you for inviting.
The Republican-controlled House of Representatives in Washington voted today on a bill to keep the government going that would have included no funding for Ukraine. Now, that bill was rejected, but it was put up to a vote nonetheless. Who do you trust on Capitol Hill tonight?
Well, it's very hard to comment on the inner politics of the United States. I think the Congress, both houses will come up finally at the end of the day or later. Was the decision for Ukraine? Of course, it's important to keep the support, the maximum support from both parties and both houses. That's in our interest, and that's basically what Volodymyr Zelensky said when he was in D.C. That we value, first of all, the support from Americans and the support from both of the parties. And we see that this part inside of the Republicans that are extremely against the aid of Ukraine, they are loud, but they are small. And I personally had conversations even earlier with a lot of Republicans, and they're still from this good old party. And, when I was watching the debates of the Republican candidates during the primaries, I just saw that, a small detail, these debates were held in the Ronald Reagan library. And I just imagined, what would Ronald Reagan say about all this situation? I mean, when this evil empire is trying to threaten the democratic world again.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Republican debate, because Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, he is one of those leading candidates. And when asked about funding for Ukraine, he said no more blank checks for Ukraine. Is that what Washington has been doing for your country, giving you a blank check?
We never had any of the blank checks. Believe all the money or all the aid, special military aid, are being traced very thoroughly. And now we have another inspector coming and starting to work in October. As well, we'll have a person designated on the investments and all the financial aid. So all of the money or military equipment are, very in strict, I would say, hands, and we have the this connect with all of the government, given all of the needed information how it's being used.
The United States, since the Russian invasion began, has provided about $100 billion in direct aid and weapons to Ukraine. Ukraine is the first European country to top the list of U.S. foreign aid since the Marshall Plan after World War II. That is how dramatic the change has been. What do you think lawmakers should be saying to their voters when the voters say, you've forgotten about our needs? Our needs should come first. I mean, you're a politician. Can you understand when Republicans say our people should come first?
A lot of this money, I would say most of this money, do come back to United States in the terms of the industry, because these weapons, Patriots, tanks, Abrams, everything that we get, the 155 caliber, these aid is being produced on American factories, and Americans are working there, and actually the industry is increasing, as well as in Germany, basically. It's and I cannot imagine the better advertisement of American weapons, the HIMARS, Patriot, other than being used in Ukraine, because now it's a practical use, and it's being tested on the battlefield. You can see the strong parts, maybe to correct some mistakes, but actually when Patriots are working over Kiev and intercepting the ballistics that Russia said could never be intercepted, I can never imagine a better ad for American weapon industry.
Ms. Kravchuk, before we let you go, there is the possibility that Donald Trump could be elected to be the next president. He is certainly campaigning to do that. He has said if he were elected that the war in Ukraine would be over within 24 hours. Do you believe him?
President Zelensky asked about a week ago to Donald Trump, please show this magic recipe how to end the war, but not to change not to put the whole world into jeopardy. Because if Putin wins and the international law means nothing, then we'll have problems with other countries that have dictators on their elite.
Evgeny Kravchuk, a member of the Ukrainian parliament. Ms. Kravchuk, we appreciate you taking the time. We know it's a difficult time, a busy time for you and the people in your country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
All right, we want to cross the Atlantic again and go over to Megan Malloy. She's the founder and executive director of Republican Women for Progress. Megan, it's good to have you with us, especially Friday right before the weekend. You were listening to what the Ukrainian lawmaker was saying. Let me get just a quick thought from you about what you think Ukrainians should be thinking about your party right now.
Honestly, Brent, nothing good. I think it's very challenging to see a Republican Party that can be so supportive of some wars and so unsupportive of others. And what they're forgetting is that they're catching so many innocent people in their political crosshairs for political points. I think, if I were to give advice to someone, I'm out of the industry of giving advice, but if I were to give advice to someone in Ukraine that were concerned about this, take a step back, listen to the debates. What is said on the debate stage is not going to probably come to fruition. That is kind of a lot of pomp and circumstance. So don't be too alarmed, but really, wait and see what comes out of the election.
Well, what's going to come out of this shutdown? Maybe that's the first question we should be worried about. Is this shutdown and the economic harm, put it that way, that it's going to do, is that as much a result of Republican infighting as opposition to the Biden presidency?
Yeah, this shutdown's a mess. I was a federal employee in 2013. That shutdown lasted about 17 days. Back then, it kind of felt like a fun, rare occasion, but they're becoming more and more frequent. They're lasting longer and impacting more folks. Like you said, the economic harm. I think every week that the federal government is shut down, the U.S. economy loses something around $1 billion just from museums like the Smithsonian, national parks, those sorts of public works being closed. I think this one is particularly tricky because of the rock and the hard place that Kevin McCarthy finds himself between. On the one hand, as you said, he's against the political damage just of the shutdown itself. On the other hand, he could theoretically avert the shutdown, but he would have to do so by working with Democrats.
And he would lose his job, right? He would lose his job, and that's the point. But so
there's, I think,
that's the point, though, isn't it? Isn't it? That's the point. If I could, Megan, that's the point. The Speaker of the House is willing to let this, this spectacle take place. The government shuts down, but he's going to keep his job at the end of the day.
Maybe. I mean, as you and Janelle were talking about earlier, there is a small contingent, a small but big enough contingent to throw things one way or the other, that have said, they're going to plot a vote. They are plotting a vote that will remove McCarthy from the speakership as early as next week. Obviously, as with all of these things, we don't know if it will actually move forward or if they're just using it in some of their negotiations on the spending bill. But I mean, you're starting to hear staff use words like inevitable. They're just trying to figure out when's the right time to do it.
There was this week this Republican debate. Here in Europe, people are scratching their heads and asking why now. It seems so early, but it was also something to watch. Donald Trump was not there. Is he going to be the Republican nominee next year?
I've gotten out of the business of predicting what Donald Trump is going to do or not do, but I think the Republican debate, as you alluded to, it was a sideshow to the circus that is Washington, D.C. right now. And honestly, it's playing second fiddle to the importance of everything else going on. I think, those of us that eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff all day, every day, I didn't even watch it. I know very few people that did.
Yeah.
I think mainly because it's so inconsequential. Like you said, is it funny to hear Chris Christie call Donald Trump Donald Duck? Kind of. But what good is that doing for the party or the public discourse right now? At the end of the day, like you said, if all or even most of these candidates stay in the race, Donald Trump wins the nomination. Yeah. Period. End of story. Like it's math. So at some point, someone is going to have to do the very improbable thing that doesn't happen, and that's get over themselves and put forth whoever is the best option to compete against Donald Trump, or just write him a one-way ticket back to the general election.
Before we let you go, I want to ask you some sad news in California. Senator Dianne Feinstein, she died today. She's a Democrat, you're a Republican, but maybe you can speak to how important she was as a role model for women in politics.
Yeah, I mean, where to even start with Di-Fi, as we affectionately call her? She was an absolute trailblazer for women in politics. I mean, she was the first female mayor of San Francisco. She went on to become chair of Senate Intelligence, Senate Rules, ranking member of Senate Judiciary Committees. And before all that, backtrack 40 years, they were trying to get her to become the vice presidential candidate in 1984 and governor of California in 1990. So politics aside, I think she's a legend that will be missed. And beyond all of that, right now, Chuck Schumer and the Democrats are really, really going to miss her because her death leaves them with a one-vote margin in the Senate when they're trying to get a whole lot done right now. So that makes things even more difficult.
She served a long time. There is this question that's not only asked about her, but also asked about the president. How long should politicians stay in office? When is old too old?
It's always trying to find that happy medium, right? Like you want someone that has experience. I think Nancy Pelosi is the best at what she does because she has so much incredible experience being on the Hill. But at one point, does that become too much experience and you're too old to really do it? I am not going to take a stand on term limits or age limits, but at some point it's just got to be common sense. Like if you're not able to go about your daily business without a whole lot of assistance, you probably shouldn't be voting on things that are going to be very detrimental or very useful to our country.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think our generation, we don't even need to worry about that because we will probably have to work into our 80s anyway, the way things are looking right now. Megan Malloy, Republican Women for Progress. Megan, we appreciate you talking with us. Thank you.